Hi, and welcome back to Guff Stuff Weekly Podcast. I'm Javan.
I'm Guff.
And bear with us today. We have new audio stuff going on.
Yes, we do.
So we're going to make sure that this sounds good.
Javan's going to make me behave myself, and I can't fidget.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the beauty of studio condenser microphones.
Absolutely. All right.
Anyways, so I want to talk to you today about a Magic the Gathering Pro Tour that happened many years ago. Okay?
Okay.
So picture this. There's this new format, and it's called Modern. It's a brand new format, and everyone's brewing up all these decks. And before we had Legacy and Vintage, which were like you could use any card from whatever, right?
Right.
And you had Standard. So you had like Type 1, They had different, they were called types back then. Long story short, this Modern tournament comes out and people are like, oh, we can run the Delver decks again. The Delver decks are going to be great. And we can run them in this format. It's shock lands, not dual lands. You know, things are going to get a little strange. It is what it is.
Right.
You also have people bring up like decks like Eternal Command, which was this crazy deck that used Ether Vials and Eternal Witnesses to just cast a cryptic command every turn and tap down your opponents and hit them for 2. Just a super silly deck.
Right.
And then you also had like the return of some of the greats, like the mid-range, like Jund. You know, Jund was a very popular deck.
Right.
And so you had all these standard decks of old that got brought into the modern era, quote unquote.
It's modern. Yeah.
And you had a modern tournament. So you had all these cool things going on. Very fun to watch, very explosive gameplay style, very quick, rapid fire, and not a lot of checks and balances. Which is one of the things about Legacy that's, you know, impressive, is that you can have all these crazy things, but because of cards like Force of Will or Cabal Therapy, all these other different cards basically are a system of checks and balances.
Okay.
So they keep all the really BS crazy stuff in line is like the idea, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so in comes a guy to Magic the Gathering Pro Tour who was a former chess champion, and his name is Stanislav Sivka.
Okay.
Yeah, you probably never heard of him.
No, not familiar.
He has basically the weirdest Pro Tour win of all time. So he's playing a deck called L.A.G.S.
Okay, I've heard of that. In fact, I've seen some.
An egg is a term in Magic the Gathering for an artifact that you pay 1 mana for, and then you typically pay 1 mana to sacrifice it and turn it into another mana, like filter mana,
right?
And then you draw a card.
Yep.
So it's all these cheap artifacts that you play over and over again, and basically you're just kind of dirtling. You're not really doing anything, but you're playing a lot of spells and drawing a lot of cards, but your mana basically stays the same the whole time.
Okay.
So like it's this weird concept, right?
Right.
And Stanislav Sivka, I don't know if he engineered the deck or if it was a pre-existing archetype, but long story short, he creates a combo deck that is now known as L.A.G.S.
Right.
That is basically I play an artifact, sacrifice it, draw a card, play another artifact, sacrifice it, draw a card. Well, Magic the Gathering has this beautiful mechanic on some cards called Storm.
Okay.
Where Storm says you copy that spell when you cast it. So Grape Shot.
Right.
I pay 2 mana. It deals 1 damage to any target. Storm. Storm says however many spells I cast or that were cast prior to the Storm trigger in the turn.
Right.
I copy that many times.
Okay.
So if I cracked 19 eggs and kept my mana the same the whole time and just played 19 cards and drew 19 cards, and then all of a sudden on the 20th card I have 2 mana, because I've had 2 mana this whole time, and I play Grape Shot,
right,
I get to deal 20 damage to you. Well, turns out that's enough to win a game of Magic the Gathering.
Yep.
Especially in a format like Modern, where shock lands are your primary method of mana fixing, and fetch lands.
Yep.
So you're paying life to get a better mana base. So now all of a sudden the threshold of spells goes down a lot.
Right. Yep.
Because you have people playing on like 17 or 15 life to start the game.
Right.
But have good mana fixing. So the topic I want to roll this into, there was a lot of controversy. The card Second Sunrise and several other cards got banned
Okay.
And the logic for why it got banned is very interesting. And the main reasoning that people speculated that it got banned, and Wizards came out and said, okay, well, we don't like this and don't like that, is that it was unfun to play against and it was boring to watch.
Okay, well, I actually think I've heard that before, where Wizards has banned stuff because it was unfun.
Or boring.
Or boring, yeah.
Right. So that's why Sensei's Dividing Top got banned at Legacy. So I'm using Magic the Gathering as our litmus test for this, or our anecdotal evidence. But this has been true for many years across lots of games.
Yep.
Of the idea of the generic term is called cheese.
Yep.
And so I wanted to get your opinion and what you think about some of the interesting cheeses that have developed. And it's funny because it usually only develops in competitive play.
Right.
Even in like basketball, like in the NBA,
right,
there was a whole rule change because people were taking a shot and then running into the opponent and getting fouled.
Right, yep.
So they had to change the rules because people were playing within the rules,
right,
but using the rules to their advantage in a way that wasn't intended.
Yeah, they've had a few rule changes in football because of the same thing.
Right, and it's this idea
just like, okay, you're just abusing this. Or even in baseball, when the balk, like that's just a guy hesitates for less than a second. Oh, you balked. Boom, done.
Yeah, it's
like, what?
It's crazy.
Like, I reset myself. That's not what I'm supposed to do. Like, okay.
Yeah, and now they have like the shot clock, or not the shot clock, but the pitch timer and all that.
Oh yeah.
And it's a really interesting concept because like I could go on and give tons of examples of this. So let's give another. I'll give another 2 examples.
Okay.
To kind of help people catch on, and maybe that don't play Magic or watch sports. So a lot of us have played StarCraft, right?
Yep.
Or Age of Empires, or RTS.
Yep.
So there's an interesting strategy in a lot of RTSs. You probably know which one I'm talking about already.
Yeah.
Where if I'm like Protoss, let's say, it's called proxying. And what I do is I basically put one of my buildings that produces units.
Right.
In a weird, obscure place just outside of your base.
Yep.
And so there's always a constant trickle of dudes coming in. And you're like, where are all these guys coming? Is he just constantly making guys and sending them across the map? So then you like have to overcommit to defend.
Yep.
And for a little bit of resources, I can get this huge advantage.
Right.
Or as Protoss, I go into your mineral line and I put a cannon down with my probe that's scouting. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, what? No, like now I have this cannon. I haven't even built the barracks yet.
Yep.
What is going on? And you can just literally lose the game off of this.
Yep.
Or towers. People will put towers on your villagers, on your wood line, or your berry bushes in Age of Empires.
Yep.
Gold is a huge one to do it with.
Yeah, yeah, towers. That was a big one for me. Is just put a tower up next to you, because you don't players lots of times don't go back and check on that stuff all the time.
No,
because they're trying to set it up, get it going, automate it a little bit, and then start playing. Well, when you have a tower out there just killing every peasant that comes along, it's like, oh my gosh, please stop.
Yeah.
Why are you doing this? This is so dumb.
And it's funny because as a competitive strategy, it works.
Yeah.
Like you can win a game by doing it.
Yep.
You see it a lot in ranked systems, like in stuff like that. But it's really funny because at the end of the day, it's like you're playing to win. This is something that you can do in the game. It might not have been intended.
Right.
Where do we draw the line on cheese?
Yeah, no, my first thought with cheese was, well, that was a good example for sure, and I knew that you were going to either go there or to another spot. Was the first time I watched competitive StarCraft play. I was watching Terran versus, I don't know, Zerg or Protoss. I don't remember which one, but literally a Terran guy built almost nothing for base. All he did is put up a bunch of what is it, silos or building? What is the buildings? I don't remember.
Oh, supply depots.
Supply depots. And he just basically put a huge wall around his whole base with supply depots at choke points and just built them like 4 deep. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like you're not building troops. You're not building. He was literally just building supply depots. They ended up winning really quickly because once he got that buffer zone, it takes time to get through that building. I'm 100% sure when StarCraft designers, Blizzard is like, hey, let's make a game. They didn't think, hey, we're gonna build walls out of supply depots. Just like
which is hilarious because if you look at StarCraft 2 and Brood War in competitive play now, it's almost fundamental to like on the ramp to your base to put a building there.
Yeah.
And leave just one tile so that one dude can walk through
one
it,
at a time.
And then you put a zealot there if you're Protoss, and all of a sudden they can't walk into your base.
I know.
Until they have flying goods.
It's crazy.
And then Terran will just put it right in front because the supply depots, they can put them into the ground so you can walk over them in StarCraft 2. Or they fly their building.
Yeah. Yeah, they can do that, or they'll put, like, at least the ones I watch, and even if I'm doing it, I'll put them down, and I'll just put siege tanks behind. And then no troops getting through, because by the time you try to kill that supply depot, siege tank's already annihilated you.
Yeah.
Hey, I know it's cheese. It's total cheese,
but
and it's like...
It's funny, because that initially was considered cheese.
Right.
But now
it's just tactic.
It's almost a expected or required strategy.
Yeah, there's some strategies now that you just pretty much have to do.
Which is funny because if you look at like back to Magic the Gathering, because this is a great example. Combo decks and like the idea of comboing and not even interacting with your opponent. Kind of came around. I could be wrong on this, but I'm almost certain one of the first times it came around was Dark Confidant. I can't remember his name.
Oh man,
Bob something.
Yeah,
he plays John Finkel at the World Championships, and they're both playing a deck that converts all damage that they deal into like you milling cards off the top of your deck, and then they just make tons of mana, cast Stroke of Genius, and make you draw out your deck. And that deck destroyed that championship.
Nice.
And like there was a Pro Tour where Storm was doing really well, and it's like this whole idea of people were like upset that they were doing stuff like this. But now it's a valid tactic. Or the prison decks where you tap everybody taps everything down. But you have one thing that you get to not tap. And so that you get to swing with it, and you win that way. And it's just like the idea of changing the rules of the game. And it's not even changing the rules of the game. It's like changing the expectation of how you're supposed to play. And how that can evolve into what will someday become eventually legitimate strategies.
Absolutely. And it is. It's stuff I kind of breaks your head a little bit. Of course, I like for the most part, I like to play games as intended, not as I broke the mechanics of. And which is fine. I mean, I'll play if I play StarCraft competitively, I will play the way I have to compete. But if we're just casual playing, like if we're playing 2v1 or something, then I don't have a problem with just playing the way I want to play, and then the other person can be the cheese cannon or whatever you want to call it. But.
And it's funny because like one of the initial things I mentioned was that cheeses and different types of cheeses typically fester / grow / are inspired by truly competitive game markets. Or not game markets, but like competitive. What's the word I'm looking for? Environments.
There you go.
Like Dota is another great example. I played tons of Dota 2. And there's several characters in that game that are cheese characters. Like it's funny because people will like one trick them, which basically means that's the only character you play in the entire game.
I'm familiar with that.
And they'll rise to super high levels. And it's because people don't know how to deal with it. But there is a fundamental flaw in cheese. And that is, if I know you're going to cheese me,
you'll just play the counter to it.
I can counter it. I can exploit the fact that you're going to cheese me.
Absolutely.
And that is why I think the putting a building on a ramp in StarCraft became a valid tactic and isn't considered cheese anymore. Because there isn't really counterplay to it, and there's no downside to doing it. Typically, when you cheese, you're sacrificing X amount of resources to do this gambit, this foil. In chess, it's a great example of like the gambits that you can do in chess. Where you're technically trading material poorly. You're making a bad trade, but put your board in a better position.
Right.
And so that's a concept that kind of has to be thought of as well.
Yeah, that's legit. I know one of the biggest cheeses I know of. Also, when you do stuff like that, if you're playing a game like that, you do develop it. Either, like you said, people find a way to make it easy to counter, or the developers nerf it.
Yeah,
Like,
typically a nerf will happen,
like World of Warcraft. I remember when we first started playing that, they had these world bosses that they would spawn in the world, and they just basically had a path they followed, and as long as you avoided them, it was no big deal. But they were really tough, so you'd have to have a lot of players mess with them, right? You couldn't just go off by yourself. You couldn't, even a small group would have a heck of a time trying to kill it. So you'd bring a whole pile of people. Well, sometimes when you're playing, there's not a whole pile of people on. So one guy got really clever and decided he'd bring it back to the major city and let the guards take care of it. And then he gets the loot.
Yeah.
All he has to do is get some hits on it. He starts to fight, drags it across the whole map, this huge world dragon, and then lets the city guards kill it. Like,
so
developers are like, okay, that can't keep going on. So now they only chase you so far before they turn around and go back to their path, because that was cheese with really no risk versus the reward.
It's really interesting because I want to go back to Dota again now.
Okay.
And League of Legends and some of the other MOBAs.
Yep.
That's a term called leashing.
Yep.
Where you leash a monster, you take its aggro,
Right.
and then you exploit its aggro by getting out of its range, and then it'll target the next closest thing in range, right? And if it can't find it, then it goes back to where it initially comes from.
Right.
So in Dota, there's some creeps, they're called, which are like the lane minions.
Yep.
And one of the things you can do is aggro a jungle camp and pull it into the lane. And then when the jungle camp hits you, the creeps realize something's hitting you. And so they aggro onto that.
Right.
And so it'll actually take a lane of minions out of play, put it into the jungle, and then if you micro it right or do it right or stack the camp, it'll kill all the lane minions.
Okay.
So the benefit of that being, now the enemy doesn't get that golden XP for killing those minions.
All right.
And if you're a support, you get the golden XP because you last hit all of the jungle camp.
Great.
And this is something that Dota decided, yes, we want in our game.
Right.
Because now it adds something for all the supports to do.
Right.
Like, it gives you another layer to the game. And now you need an extra support in a lane that typically didn't have a support to stop them from doing that.
Right.
It's
great.
like this whole crazy, almost like Cold War of jungle minions and creeps.
Just a whole separate mini game going on inside the real game.
Yeah.
That's pretty, it gets to be that way. It's quite crazy. I do appreciate it. That I like creativity for sure. I know my son would try his hardest when he was playing games, and sometimes he'd find ways to just, like, how did you do that? Well, I don't know. I just tried everything until I figured it out. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I'm pretty sure that the game developers didn't design the game for that, but okay. I mean, you figured it out, so whatever, bud.
And, like, I do want to point out, like, there is a very, I'm not going to say it's a fine line, because it's not a fine line. It's a fairly bold line between cheating and cheesing.
Yeah.
Cheating means that you are, I guess maybe it is a finer line than I think.
Right.
Because if you think about it, cheesing is working within the rules of the game to exploit advantage.
Yep.
Cheating is typically, in my mind, altering the game itself.
Right.
Against the rules of the game to exploit some advantage. So
right.
I guess, like, yeah, it is a bold line. It's not a fine line, so to speak. It seems like a fine line, but when you, like, scrutinize it and look at it, it's cheating is altering the game against the rules to get advantage. Cheesing is bending the rules, but you're still following them to get advantage.
Yeah, it's a lot like, I know when my son was young, he'd get banned off a lot of servers because he was very good at just using hip shooting in first-person shooters. You know, they'd have all these big, powerful sniper rifles.
Yep.
But he got really good at hip shooting. Instead of having to pull the sniper rifle up and shoot, he just used the dot on the screen and he's got really good at doing that. And then you're cheating. And unfortunately, a lot of people feel you're cheating when you're cheesing.
Yeah.
You're not breaking any rules. You're not hacking the game. You're not using aimbots. I know he wasn't using aimbot because it was my PS3 that he was playing on. So I know he didn't hack it. I was watching him do it.
So, right. A great example is the old 360, right? No scope.
Yeah.
And people use that now as like a skill-based thing. It initially wasn't. It was a cheese tactic.
Yeah, exactly.
Because when you swung 360 all the way around, it centered your reticle in the screen.
Right.
Or something like that. And then you could fire without any recoil. Or there was some weird niche case of that happening.
Right.
And so that's where the 360 no scope comes from.
Yep.
It's that it was initially like an exploit within the mechanics of the game engine.
Right.
To function.
Yeah, there is that line. It's a line, and people think you're cheating when you're doing stuff like that. The tomahawk.
Oh,
when you're standing, I don't remember. I think it was called one of the Call of Duty games.
Rust. Was it Rust? I think the map was Rust.
Where you could just grab a tomahawk at the starting point and throw it at a certain spot on the screen, and you would kill people spawning constantly.
Yeah.
You just sat there and did that over and over and over. Well, people would just constantly be dying. And like, that's cheating, man. Like that's not cheating because the mechanics of the game say you can do it.
Yeah.
Just because some kid figured out that he practiced for thousands of hours to do it.
Exactly what pixel to throw it out. So, and now here comes an interesting point on that now too. Is like if you ever watch Counter-Strike, like Pro Counter-Strike or anything like that,
right?
They'll be like, okay, you throw a flashbang at this wall, it bounces off, it'll land in their spawn, and go off if they're running down this hallway.
Right. And
so now you get into what Blood Red Sakura and I talked about in fight games. I think this is a term that was relatively new to me when I was learning about fight games.
Right.
But it's a knowledge check.
Right.
Kind of like in D&D where you have
absolutely.
to roll an investigation or a perception, whatever. But it's like a real life version of that.
Right.
Well, not real life, but video game.
Right. Yeah. No.
Because if you don't know that if you stand there and I throw the tomahawk, which I'm going to do every time at the start of the game, you're going to die.
Okay.
But if you don't know that, that's an advantage for me.
Right.
But if you know that and you move out of the way, I've just wasted a tomahawk.
Yeah. No. Exactly. Yeah.
And
exactly.
It's a knowledge check. It's almost like a pseudo gatekeeping for higher levels of play.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's really
I
cool.
think it is, and I know I don't have a lot of games that I've played competitively at any real extent. I would say, I hate to say World of Warcraft is probably my most competitive game I played, because I did play a lot of PvP in that. And I unfortunately played one of the classes that got the most grief. Well, other than maybe the Paladin. But I played a Warlock, and it was a damage over time Warlock. And so they just dot you.
Yeah.
And for little to no mana, you can hit everybody on the field, and they're constantly taking damage unless they want to cast a spell that costs more to get rid of that. Then it cost me to cast it again.
So it's that idea of attrition incremental.
Yeah, I would just sit there and do that over and over and over all the time. I'm getting health from this, and they're like, they want to run me down and beat me to death, but all I have to do is just keep running circles because it's really hard just to catch somebody, And I don't know. It's just. But it comes down to knowledge again. There's easy ways to stop it. You just have to know how.
Right, and that's like when Blood RS and I were talking about fighting games, or even Space Goon when he was talking about Total War. There's a lot of things in those games like that if you don't know to put up a public order building on the highest difficulty, or how to deal with the rebellion that happens, and then you don't put up a building, you're gonna get shafted.
Yep.
And it's that idea of like,
excuse me.
This is one of the reasons I like roguelikes so much, or like Caves of Cud or something, or Cogmind, whatever.
Right.
And I watched a pretty good video on a guy explaining all this, and so I'm just going to kind of paraphrase what he said. And it's the idea that your meta progression and your way you get better at the game is by fundamentally learning more about the game.
Oh, absolutely. Which
is really interesting because that type of game isn't as popular with the gaming. It's just not as widely played as other games.
No, well,
I mean, you look at like Slay the Spire,
right?
Or you look at any rogue light, which we talked about this many moons ago.
Right.
But the idea that I play a run and I lose the run, but you give me something now that makes the next run easier.
Right.
Well, in a knowledge check game or a game without meta progression, the only knowledge you get, the only thing you get is the knowledge of how you lost that.
Right.
And how you turn that into something better.
Right.
Which is funny because, we talked about board games last week. And rather than like randomness or a handicap in board games like chess, the pure strategy ones,
Right.
it's your knowledge of what happened the last time you played that benefits you in your next game.
Right. Right. Exactly.
And I feel like that's one of the most effective ways to counter cheese.
Yeah.
Is to just experience it once and then don't get beat by it again.
Yeah.
And like it's the whole fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice.
Right.
Well, I should have known better.
Yeah, no, exactly. It all goes back to definitely knowledge of the game. And I feel that's why I felt comfortable in, well, even I'll go back to even the older Ultima Online. I used to play, well, I guess maybe I probably played more PvP in that than I did. And it just got to be to the point that I played a stealth or disarm rogue. And I mean, then you find someone that's like, well, I'm going to be a poisoner. Okay, well, you find ways to deal with that. You steal their regents so they can't cast poison on you. I mean, you just find ways around it.
Yep.
And I prefer games like that personally. I don't mind handheld games, which I consider casual games. Mm-hmm. I just feel like most of them games are holding your hand through the game. There's really no, other than artificial, like unlocking new recipes. Yeah. So like I'll use Stardew for example. There's some difficulties in some parts of Stardew, but overall it's a very casual game.
Yeah, it's not intended to be
which is fine. I'm not dissing Stardew. I like casual games too, but it wouldn't be a game where I'd be like, I want to really challenge myself today. I'm gonna throw down a Stardew Valley game.
Yeah,
I'm just like,
it's funny because we have this overarching theme. There's one thing theme to take away from the podcast and all the episodes we've talked about. It's like expectations versus reality, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you don't go into Stardew being like, yeah, this is a competitive game. You're like, no, this is just a chill. I'm gonna kill some time.
Yeah. I know a person that I was gonna talk into playing Stardew, and they didn't want to play because in Stardew it breaks up the playtime too much because you'll get, was it 10 minutes of playtime and then you got to rest, and then 10 minutes of playtime you got to rest, and that they're like, well, that doesn't seem fun to me. I'm like, oh, all right. I mean,
yeah, you can't just.
But I don't know. Would Stardew be fun if you could just do it all? You'd get it all done in just probably 6-7 hours.
I feel like. I feel like the allotted breaks in Stardew and the break in the game loop.
Yep.
Actually encourages you to play more, because you have to stop for a second.
Yeah.
So you have to plan around that.
Right.
And that's the limiting pressure in Stardew.
Otherwise you'd build fields of just fields upon fields, harvest them all in a matter of an hour, a couple hours whenever they grew, and then you'd be the richest person because you'd already have 80,000 plants, because you'd like.
It's the same reason why the health bar and the exhaustion bar exists.
Right. Yeah.
It's games without pressure or outward limiting factors lose a lot of value over time.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I guess the last cheese I want to talk about is one of my all-time favorites.
Okay.
So, and I'm pretty sure it was an accident when people first discovered it.
Okay.
So I want to talk about a series that is considered by a lot of people to be like one of the most difficult, challenging game series of all time.
Okay.
I want to talk about From Software's Dark Souls series.
Okay. Fair enough.
There's a lot of people that just, that game is too hard, or
Right.
that game is too difficult, or it just doesn't click. Because there's no instant gratification. The only way to get better in Dark Souls is to literally just die.
Right.
And just die over and over again to the same stuff until you learn how to finally deal with it.
Right, yeah. How you learn how to beat each mob, each everything, yeah.
That's the phrase that's thrown around
Get
a lot.
good, yeah. Get good, nerd.
That's like, it's funny because it's become this meme, but at the end of the day, that's the only way to understand Dark Souls, is to literally just play so much that you achieve mastery and you effectively get good.
Yeah.
Because no one can tell you how to do it.
Right.
There's no secret to... That's what one of the beautiful things about those games. Anyways, So Taurus Demon is like one of the first things you fight
Okay.
in Dark Souls that you're intended to fight. There's a fun little thing that if you get too close to him, he jumps backwards and resets aggro. Well, not resets aggro, but like tries to clear space a little bit.
Yep.
Because he likes to charge you. Well, you fight him on a bridge, and part of the bridge is broken. And if you do it right and angle it right, he'll jump off the bridge and die.
Right.
And this is like, in all of the FromSoft games, this has always been a thing of like, God, what the heck was that? The Gold Knight in Dark Souls 1 at the first bonfire. Oh my God, dude.
I'm not sure. Yeah, it's been a while.
This guy is just brutal to fight. Like, he is awful to fight. But if you just press kick, like forward kick, you kick him off a ledge because he's sitting on like the edge of the fucking world. And so you kick him, and he falls off and dies. You get all his souls. You relive the game. His items are all there.
Right.
And you're like,
what?
And like when you finally break that idea that you have to fight everything,
right?
It's like the true villain moment, right? Like, I could fight you honorably, or I could just kick you off the ledge when you're not looking.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
Either way, I achieved the same goal, but one of them cost me a lot less health and potions and all that.
Yeah. Well, I know this is the same concept when Baldur's Gate released. I think they've now fixed part of it, but you get into the goblin camp and you fight is it a drow lady?
Yeah, Minthara.
Yeah, you just walk up and push her off. It's over.
No,
She's dead. Like, literally, you win the game.
Thing. That's still a thing.
Okay, I don't know. I haven't tried it in a while, but
spoilers. But Baldur's Gate 3 has been out for a while.
For a while now, so yeah.
But yeah, so there's a character called Minthara.
It's like,
and I did this the first time I fought her.
Mm-hmm.
But I've restarted that game like 5 times because I'm like not happy with the choices I made. Basically, buyer's remorse the whole time. Anyways,
nice.
Not for buying the game, but for like what I did in the playthrough.
Right.
Anyways, yeah, you just tell her like, oh, I know where the druid camp is. It's over here, and she's like, cool, I'm gonna go kill them. And then as she's walking across the bridge, you literally shoot the bridge, and she falls to her death.
Yeah, it's just pretty simple. Like, I did it by accident the first time. I didn't even realize that was going to happen.
How many times have you been playing Baldur's Gate 3? This has happened to me all the time. And, like, I'll have one character standing too close to a ledge, and then the NPC will be like, oh, I'm just going to shoot a thunder arrow or whatever, and all of a sudden my guy's dead. I'm like, oh, my God. Like, stupid me.
Yep.
You know?
But that's learning. You're learning.
But it's fun because it's something like... And in FromSoft's Dark Souls, and even in Baldur's Gate 3... It's kind of amazing because, like, in a lot of the way we've been trained to look at games, has been like, hey, if I kick someone and there's a wall there, an invisible wall, they're just gonna stay there. Nothing's gonna happen.
Yep, exactly.
And that's how games were for a long time.
Oh yeah, and some are still that way. But
like, Gabe Newell has a really cool video where he talks about making Half-Life and how, like, if someone shoots a wall, there should be a bullet hole in the wall.
Right.
And they did that to all their games. And stuff. You know, it's that idea of like just that little bit of immersion. But the cool thing is when games put that in but don't tell you.
Right.
And so, like, all of a sudden it's like a happy accident that you discover it.
Yep.
And it's like, it's just like this awesome feeling of, holy crap, I just solved a difficult puzzle by thinking
outside the box.
Not
necessarily doing as what you thought the game developers wanted. I like the trend. Like, when Baldur's Gate came out, there was a lot of things that they did differently than most RPGs do. Like, it's probably the most free-to-play game. Like, you play it however you want.
And it's funny because
there's not very many choke points to where you mess up the game so bad that it's not playable anymore.
Yep. And, I mean, to be fair, Larian did an awesome job with Divinity Original Sin 2.
Yeah,
that game is... Like, if you played that game and then you played Baldur's Gate 3, you're like, oh... Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, I played it a little bit. I bought it and then I got into something else and I didn't play it much after that. Because for me, RPGs are one that I want to play and I just want to play. That's all I want to play. I don't want to do anything else. I don't want to do podcasts. I don't want to go to the work. I just want to play the game, you know?
But I think we're digressing, getting a little... I think we've covered the topic enough. I think cheese is like an integral, important part of competitive gaming.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it will balance itself out. And
Yep.
it's essentially knowledge checks. Like,
Right.
So, and I think it has its place, and I'd be happy to see cheese just disappear.
There you go.
Or not sorry, I would be unhappy.
Yeah,
to see
unhappy.
cheese
Yeah, I was
disappear.
like, okay.
But that's it for today's episode.
All right, later.